On my sister's 25th birthday, my parents threw a party so big that it felt like a royal coronation. Whilst on the other hand, I was handed an apron and a tray, ordered to serve guests and relatives like I didn't belong to the family. I felt like a maid servant in my own family. A month later, my own birthday came and all I received were two empty words, "Happy birthday." Mom said, whilst Dad followed saying same. No cake. No gift. No celebration. I didn't complain. I didn't argue. I didn't even react. I stayed silent, because 3 days later, I made a decision that would quietly unravel everything they thought they controlled, and they never believed I could ever do such a thing. My sister's birthday party so big that our neighbors complained about the noise and the limited parking space. They hired caterers, a live musical band, a professional photographer who kept calling her the star of the day. There were balloons shaped like champagne glasses, gold-lettered banners, custom cupcakes with her name iced on top. And me. I was handed an apron. "Rose," my mother said, tying it tight around my waist like she was doing me a favor. "You're good at staying busy. Help serve the guests." That was how it all started. My sister's name is Lydia. She is charming in the way people mean when they say, effortless. She doesn't try to be admired. She just exists, and people rearrange themselves around her. My parents did too. They always had. When we were kids, Lydia was spirited. I was difficult. When Lydia forgot her homework, the teacher must have been unclear. When I forgot mine, it was proof I wasn't trying hard enough. When Lydia cried, the house went quiet. When I cried, I was told to lower my voice. We were only 18 months apart, but the roles were assigned early and never revised. Golden child. Support staff. And no matter how old I got, no matter how much I accomplished quietly, the script never changed. The morning of Lydia's birthday party, I arrived early to help my parents set up. I thought, naively, that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd say, "Oh Rose, you should get ready too." Maybe they'd acknowledge that it was my birthday month too. Maybe they'd remember. Instead, my mother handed me a printed checklist. "Can you make sure the drinks stay full?" she said. "And wipe tables as you go. People notice those things." I looked at the list. Serve guests. Clear plates. Refill drinks. Help caterers. Assist photographer if needed. My name wasn't on the guest list. I laughed, a short breath that escaped before I could stop it. "What?" my father asked, not looking up from adjusting the sound system. "Nothing," I said. "Just, where should I put my bag?" My mother gestured toward the laundry room. "Anywhere out of sight." Out of sight. Of course. The first guest arrived at noon. By 1 o'clock, the yard was full. People I hadn't seen in years smiled at me vaguely, assuming I worked there. One woman handed me her empty glass without making eye contact. "Thank you, sweetheart." Another asked, "Are you with the caterers?" I corrected no one. I just nodded and kept moving. At one point, Lydia caught my eye from across the lawn. She was laughing, champagne in hand, surrounded by friends and cousins. She looked at my apron, then at my face, and smiled. Not a cruel smile. A satisfied one. The kind that says, "This is exactly where you belong." Later, when the photographer asked for a family shot, my mother finally noticed me standing nearby. "Oh," she said, surprised. "Rose, you're still here?" Still. As if I'd been lingering accidentally. "You can jump in quickly," she added, already waving me over. "But hurry, guests need drinks." I stood at the edge of the photo. No one adjusted to make space. I smiled because that's what you do when you don't want to be accused of ruining things. The photographer snapped the picture. And then I went back to work. That night, my feet ached. My hands smelled like citrus and sanitizer. I sat alone on the edge of my bed scrolling through social media. Photos were already up. Best birthday ever. So grateful for my family. Couldn't have done it without you, Mom and Dad. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. In one wide shot, you could see me blurred in the background, mid-step, carrying a tray. No caption. No context. Just part of the scenery. A month passed. No party planning. No subtle hints. No conversations. I told myself not to expect anything. Expectation is how they get you. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up early and made myself coffee. I checked my phone. Nothing. No text from my parents. No message from Lydia. By noon, my mother called. "Happy birthday, Rose," she said. That was it. No follow-up. No question. No invitation. Just a sentence, delivered like checking off a task. "Thank you," I said. And then I stayed quiet. I didn't remind them. I didn't joke. I didn't ask, "Are we doing anything?" I had learned something over the years. If you want to see how people truly value you, stop making it easy for them to pretend. 3 days passed. No card. No cake. No acknowledgement. Lydia posted another story. Leftover photos from her party. I watched them all without reacting. Then I did something I'd never done before. Nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't confront. I didn't explain. I simply went silent. And that silence. That's what unsettled them. What my parents didn't know, what Lydia didn't know, was that while they were busy celebrating the version of family that made them look good, I had quietly been building a life outside of them. I worked for a logistics company most of them thought was temporary. I didn't talk about it because no one asked. But I had moved from assistant to operations coordinator in under 3 years. I had been trusted with things they would never imagine trusting me with. And more importantly, I had access. There was something else too. Something my family loved to brag about. My grandfather's old transport business. They talked about it like it was a legacy my father had taken over. But what they didn't say, what they never corrected, was that legally, it wasn't my father's. It was in a trust. A trust my grandfather had set up carefully before he died. A trust that paid dividends. A trust that required an administrator. And for the last 2 years, that administrator had been me. Because my grandfather trusted quiet people. By the 3rd day after my birthday, my parents started to notice the shift. I stopped responding quickly. Stopped showing up unannounced. Stopped filling gaps they didn't even realize existed. They thought I was sulking. They thought I'd get over it. They were wrong. Because silence isn't absence. It's preparation. And 3 days later, they were about to learn exactly what they'd overlooked. By the 3rd day after my birthday, my parents had already decided what my silence meant. They decided it meant nothing. That was the mistake. In our family, silence had always been my assigned role. I was quiet when my sister Lydia took the bigger bedroom because she needed space to think. I was quiet when my college fund disappeared into her study abroad emergency. I was quiet when relatives asked why I was still living at home while Lydia posted photos from Dubai, Paris, Santorini. So when I said nothing after my birthday, no thank you, no complaint, no passive-aggressive post, my parents assumed I'd returned to my place. Invisible. Useful. Replaceable. They went back to their routines quickly. My mother resumed her habit of leaving grocery lists on my bed instead of asking me. My father went back to calling Lydia my pride in conversations where I was sitting right there. And Lydia started acting generous. That's how I knew something was coming. She began offering me leftovers from dinners I hadn't been invited to. She'd sigh loudly and say things like, "You should really get out more, Rose. Staying home all the time can't be healthy." Once, while I was washing dishes after one of her brunch gatherings, she leaned against the counter and said, "You know, not everyone's meant to be celebrated. Someone has to keep things running." She smiled when she said it. Like she was offering wisdom. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. There was something I'd learned over the years of being overlooked. When people don't see you as a threat, they don't hide things from you. They talk freely. They leave documents around. They assume you don't understand. My parents had a small but successful family business, a wholesale food distribution company my grandfather had built from nothing. It wasn't glamorous, but it owned warehouses, trucks, and long-term contracts. It paid for everything in our lives. Growing up, I'd heard my father say, over and over, "One day, Lydia will take this over. She has leadership energy." Lydia had never worked there. I had. I'd started helping during high school summers. Inventory, invoicing, supplier calls. When staff quit suddenly, I filled gaps. When systems failed, I learned them. Quietly. By the time I turned 26, I knew the business better than my parents realized. I just wasn't announced. 3 days after my birthday, while my mother was out and my father was napping, I noticed a manila folder on the dining table. Succession planning. I didn't open it right away. I made tea. I sat. I waited. Then I read every page. What I saw didn't shock me. It confirmed me. They were restructuring ownership, slowly transferring controlling interest to Lydia. Not because she'd earned it, but because she was Lydia. My parents were planning to ease her in by giving her authority while I continued doing operational work behind the scenes. No title. No equity. No protection. And buried in the paperwork was something else. Debt. The business had taken on loans I hadn't known about. Risky ones. Loans tied to personal guarantees. My parents' guarantees. And soon, Lydia's. If anything went wrong, the fallout wouldn't hit her first. It would hit the person keeping things running. Me. I closed the folder and put it back exactly where it had been. Then I went to my room and started making calls. I didn't start with confrontation. I started with curiosity. I reached out to an old client contact, someone I'd helped resolve a supplier dispute years ago. We met for coffee. I didn't mention family. I talked business. He was surprised by how much I knew. He asked why I wasn't listed anywhere officially. I smiled and said, family dynamics. 2 days later, he introduced me to someone else. Then another. What my parents had never understood was that while they were busy showcasing Lydia, I had been building quiet trust. People remembered who solved problems when no one else would. People remembered who didn't posture. By the end of that week, I had something I'd never had before. Options. A week later, my parents hosted another family dinner. Lydia announced it casually. "Oh, by the way, wear something nice. Some people from the business will be there." She didn't look at me when she said it. I knew what that meant. I was going to be staff again. Sure enough, when guests arrived, my mother handed me an apron. "Just help out tonight," she whispered. "This is important for Lydia." I took the apron. And I wore it. But I didn't disappear. As I moved through the room, refilling glasses, I listened. Lydia was talking, confidently, loudly, about expansion plans she didn't understand. She used words incorrectly. She exaggerated her role. My parents nodded like proud sponsors. Then someone asked a technical question. Lydia froze. There was a pause. My father glanced at me instinctively. The guest followed his gaze. "Rose," the man asked, "didn't you handle the logistics restructuring last year?" The room shifted. Lydia laughed too quickly. "Oh, she helps sometimes." I met the man's eyes and said calmly, "Yes, I designed and implemented it." Silence. Not awkward silence. Attentive silence. I answered the question clearly, simply, without undermining anyone. But something broke that night. Not loudly. Internally. After the guests left, Lydia cornered me in the kitchen. "You embarrassed me," she said, voice low. I answered a question, I replied. You know how this works. Yes, I said. I do. That was the moment she realized I wasn't apologizing. 2 days later, I received an email. An offer to join a partner venture connected to, ironically, my family's own supply chain. It wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. I didn't accept immediately. Instead, I printed the email. That evening, I asked my parents to sit down. They looked surprised, concerned. I've been offered a role, I said. Equity-based. Independent. My mother frowned. Why would you leave us? I didn't raise my voice. I haven't been with you, I said. My father tried to smooth it over. Rose, this isn't about feelings. Family businesses are complicated. I know, I replied. That's why I won't be invisible in one anymore. Lydia scoffed from the doorway. You're being dramatic. I handed them the printed offer. My mother read it twice. My father went pale. Because the company offering me the role wasn't small. It was strategically positioned. And if I accepted, the balance of power would shift. They asked me to think about it. I already had. I took the offer. Quietly. No announcement. No post. No celebration. Within 3 days, suppliers began redirecting questions to me, not my parents. Lydia's future leadership meetings lost attendance. My parents received calls asking why I was no longer listed internally. They called me into the living room. My father looked tired. My mother looked scared. Lydia looked furious. What are you doing? My mother asked. I answered calmly. I'm choosing myself. My father tried authority. You're tearing this family apart. I shook my head. I'm stepping out of a role you forced me into. Lydia laughed bitterly. You think you've won? I didn't smile. I think you've finally noticed. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It rearranges the room. At first, my parents tried to pretend nothing had changed. My mother still cooked Sunday dinners. My father still spoke about the business, as if it were intact, centralized, obedient. Lydia still introduced herself as the future whenever relatives asked. But the questions stopped landing where they used to. Suppliers didn't call my father first anymore. Account managers CC'd me by default. Invitations arrived addressed to Rose Calder, not family. And Lydia noticed. She noticed when her emails went unanswered. She noticed when meetings she hosted were quietly rescheduled around her. She noticed when people stopped laughing at her jokes and started asking for data instead. One night, she slammed her phone on the counter and turned to me. Why do they keep asking for you? I didn't look up from my laptop. Because they trust me. She scoffed. They know me. I finally met her eyes. They know who performs. That was the first time she looked scared instead of angry. In our family, inheritance had always been spoken about like prophecy. Lydia will inherit the business. Lydia will inherit the house. Lydia will carry the family name forward. I was never mentioned, not because I wasn't present, but because my presence was assumed. Like furniture. Like infrastructure. What my parents hadn't understood was that inheritance only matters if the thing you inherit still functions. And it was starting not to. The partner venture I joined didn't poach clients aggressively. They didn't need to. They simply offered stability, clarity, and, most importantly, me. Contracts followed competence. Within weeks, my parents' company was still standing, but hollowed. The most reliable revenue streams were now routed through partnerships where I had equity and authority. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. The reckoning didn't happen at a boardroom table. It happened at my aunt's anniversary party. Big family. Big crowd. Long tables. Laughter layered with curiosity. I arrived late. Not dramatically, just deliberately. People noticed. They always do when you stop chasing rooms and start entering them. My aunt hugged me and whispered, "I hear congratulations are in order." Across the room, Lydia stiffened. Relatives approached me with questions. Polite, careful ones. "I heard you're leading something new. Is it true you're consulting independently now? You were always so capable. Always." That word landed differently now. My parents watched from a distance. My mother's smile was tight. My father's posture slumped. Lydia tried to intercept conversations, redirect attention, reassert herself. But attention isn't a switch you flip. It's a response. And hers wasn't working anymore. At some point, someone asked the question my parents had avoided for decades. Why wasn't Rose ever announced? The room went quiet, not hostile, just curious. My father opened his mouth. I answered first. I was busy making sure things worked. That was all I said. No accusations. No list of sacrifices. No childhood inventory of neglect. Just truth. And something incredible happened. People filled in the gaps themselves. They always do when the narrative finally aligns. Later that night, my parents asked to speak with me alone. Not Lydia. Just me. We stood on the patio. The air was cool. The music distant. My mother spoke first. "We didn't realize you felt so overlooked." I almost laughed. Instead I said, "You realized. You just didn't think it would cost you." My father rubbed his hands together. "We assumed you'd stay." "That was never an agreement," I replied. "That was convenience." He nodded slowly. For the first time, he looked at me not as support staff, but as a loss. 2 weeks later, my father asked me to come to his office. Not the business office. His personal one. He slid a document across the desk. The revised will. Ownership wasn't being handed to Lydia outright anymore. Assets were being redistributed. Trusts adjusted. Decision-making authority divided based on operational contribution. Merit. My name appeared where it never had before. Not as an apology. As a correction. "This is fair," my father said quietly. I scanned the pages, then pushed them back. "I'm not here to inherit what I've already outgrown." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Then what do you want?" I didn't hesitate. "I want freedom. And acknowledgement." They signed the changes anyway. Not for me. For themselves. Because now they knew something they couldn't unlearn. I would not disappear to preserve their comfort. Lydia didn't take the shift quietly. She tried charm. Then outrage. Then victimhood. She told relatives I'd changed. She told contacts I was ungrateful. She told herself it was temporary. But systems don't lie. When she tried to assert authority she didn't earn, people smiled and deferred, to me. When she tried to leverage the family name, people asked about structure. When she tried to humiliate me publicly, she failed, because I no longer needed the room. The final break came when she confronted me in private. "You stole everything from me," she said. I shook my head. "I stopped giving you what you never earned." She cried then. Not for me. For the first time in her life, the world wasn't bending. I moved out shortly after. Not dramatically. No announcement. Just quietly packed, left keys on the counter, and closed a door that had never really been mine. I sent one message to the family group chat. "I love you. I'm no longer available for roles that require my erasure." No debate followed. Only silence. And this time, it worked for me. 6 months later, my birthday came again. I celebrated it with people who knew my name without prompting. There was laughter. There were gifts. There was ease. No performance. No apron. No silence I hadn't chosen. That night, I realized something important. The opposite of being the golden child isn't being punished. It's being free. Moral lessons. This story is a reminder that favoritism doesn't just hurt feelings, it warps families, blinds parents, and quietly destroys trust over time. When one child is endlessly celebrated and another is reduced to usefulness, resentment isn't created by rebellion, but by neglect. Silence, often mistaken for weakness, can become a form of clarity, and self-respect sometimes begins the moment you stop begging to be seen. In the end, no title, inheritance, or golden child status can replace integrity, earned respect, and the courage to walk away from roles that require your erasure to keep others comfortable.